Hello world, let's go look this.
The Archivist's secret. It started with a paper cut. Interning at the National Archives wasn't exactly how Emily Hart pictured spending her final summer before graduate school. While her friends were backpacking through Europe or diving into internships at glossy law firms, she was elbow-deep in declassified documents, breathing in decades of dust, and navigating a maze of bureaucratic silence. She didn't mind the quiet. Emily was methodical, precise. That's why she'd been assigned to the JFK records, tens of thousands of documents released under the JFK Assassination Records Collection Act of 1992, the files forming an intricate lattice of facts, theories, and redactions. The official story, told 1,000 times, Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. And yet, the more she read, the less that made sense. The cut happened on a Friday afternoon, her fingers moving too quickly over brittle paper. She winced and drew her hand back, noticing the edge of a folder jutting out where it shouldn't have been, misfiled between two unrelated memos. The tab read, JFK Strike C/4 Priority. No date, no agency code, just a faded green sticker on the corner. Not standard. Emily hesitated. Then she opened it. Inside were 3 pages. The first was a typewritten memo labeled Top Secret, Eyes Only from SC. Wainwright to a Dejar O'Connell dated September 17, 1963. The second was a partially redacted transcript. The third was a photograph, grainy and slightly water-damaged, showing 4 men at a round table, one of whom bore an uncanny resemblance to Clay Shaw. Her heart kicked hard in her chest. She read the memo again. As directed, Strike C is in motion. Target Alpha, Castro, and Bravo, Diệm, have been prioritized under plausible deniability operations. Regarding Target Charlie, logistics remain unstable due to media proximity and federal presence. Recommend delaying further directives until internal leak is identified. Target Delta remains an open file. Contact Monarch has relayed willingness to proceed upon green light. Presidential proximity remains key. Suggest November window. Target Alpha, Castro. Target Bravo, President Ngo Dinh Diem of South Vietnam, assassinated 3 weeks before JFK. Target Charlie, presumably JFK himself. But Target Delta? Who? Emily felt the floor tilt under her. She reread the final sentence again. Suggest November window. It implied the decision had already been made, 2 months before Dallas. Was this real? She carefully refiled the folder, snapping a photo of the memo with her phone before closing the drawer. Her fingers trembled slightly, adrenaline catching up with her. She shouldn't have done that. Photographing government records was a serious violation. But something about this wasn't right. This file wasn't logged in the archive database. No metadata, no shelf record. Someone had hidden it in plain sight. She looked over her shoulder. The document room was empty, as usual. Only the dull hum of fluorescent lights filled the silence. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. She zoomed in on the memo repeatedly, her mind spinning with names, dates, operations. Monarch. She cross-referenced the name with CIA project code names, but came up empty. Even in her university research work on Cold War spy networks, she'd never seen that term attached to assassination operations. By morning, her head ached from lack of rest and overanalysis. But she knew one thing. Someone had considered JFK not as the only target, but one of 4. Diem was real. So was Castro. That meant the 4th could be real, too, and still alive. Monday morning, she returned to the archives early, heart pounding as she slipped into the reading room. The file was gone. She blinked and opened the drawer again. Checked the folders on either side. Gone. No trace. Emily, you're in early, came a voice behind her. She jumped. It was Mr. Klein, her supervisor, a stout man in his 60s with thick glasses and the kind of quiet demeanor that always felt vaguely watchful. Why, yeah, she said, trying to sound casual. Wanted to finish the State Department batch. He gave a short nod. Careful what you dig up. Some things are better left where they lie. He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Her skin prickled. She left at lunchtime, heading for the metro, walking fast. She didn't know where she was going yet, only that she needed a second opinion. Someone outside the archives. Someone who wouldn't dismiss her as a conspiracy theorist or fire her for snooping where she shouldn't. She texted her old professor, Dr. Levi Monroe, a retired intelligence historian from Georgetown. Emily, need to talk. Urgent. JFK files. Found something not listed in catalog. Possibly Black Project? He replied within minutes. Dr. Monroe, my place. No phones. 3 p.m. Come alone. She didn't hesitate. Dr. Monroe's house in Foggy Bottom was a fortress of books, oak-paneled, and smelling faintly of tobacco. He waved her inside, closing the curtains before she even sat down. Emily pulled up the photo of the memo on her phone. Monarch, he muttered. I haven't heard that name in decades. You know it. I know of it, he corrected. It was a whisper inside a whisper. A rumored off-the-books initiative between rogue elements in Langley and some private military contractors. Monarch wasn't a program. It was a fixer. Someone who could make problems go away without leaving footprints. People used to joke he was a ghost. But if this memo's real, he sat back, frowning. This is bigger than the church committee ever imagined. I thought I was losing my mind, she whispered. But if Target Delta is still alive, don't we need to find out who? Monroe leaned forward. That depends. Are you prepared to become the target? By the time Emily left, dusk had fallen, and so had her sense of safety. She could feel it now, eyes following her. The faint paranoia that started as intuition. She walked faster. Then she saw him. A man in a gray coat at the edge of the block, unmoving. Watching her. She turned a corner. He followed. She ducked into a bookstore and out the back, heart hammering. The world felt suddenly untrustworthy. The archives, her co-workers, even Monroe. Who else knew? Who else had seen the file? She needed to know who Target Delta was, and why someone wanted it forgotten. Emily didn't go home that night. Instead, she checked into a cheap hotel near DuPont Circle using cash. She left her phone powered off, battery removed, and buried it beneath the lining of her backpack. Monroe had warned her. If they know you've seen it, they'll be watching. Listening. She didn't need to be told twice. Her dreams that night were fractured. Flashes of JFK's motorcade, a fourth unseen rifle, shadowy men in rooms lit only by desk lamps. When she awoke, sweat clung to her skin. The whisper of Target Delta echoed in her mind. The next morning, Monroe called her on the hotel landline. He'd known she'd go to ground. I made some calls, he said in a low voice. Quiet ones. There was a Monarch connection to a contractor group in the 60s called Praxis Systems. Never officially CIA, but everyone knew they had ties. They supposedly disbanded in '69, but some say they just went private. Changed names. They handled things the government didn't want fingerprints on. You think they're still active? I think if they are, and they know you're digging, they won't let it go. Emily sat silently, then asked, What about Target Delta? Any ideas? Monroe sighed. There was one high-profile Cold War diplomat, never confirmed, but rumored to have opposed Kennedy's Vietnam strategy aggressively. Big in the shadows, but not a household name. He disappeared from public view shortly after Dallas. Resigned. Changed his name. He might have been Delta. I'll send you his dossier. Emily's fax machine spat out 5 pages within the hour. The name was Ellis Darnell, former intelligence liaison to Southeast Asia. No photos after 1965. Rumored ties to early CIA black sites. If he was still alive, he'd be in his 90s. And he might be the key to unraveling the entire plan. That night, she found herself outside the Library of Congress, poring over microfilm reels from the early 60s. Ellis Darnell's name popped up in briefings, but almost always as a footnote, until one 1963 article in a defunct political journal mentioned a classified disagreement between Darnell and President Kennedy on the scope and legality of escalating paramilitary operations abroad. She wrote it down. Then, someone sat next to her. She didn't look, didn't breathe. You shouldn't be looking into this, the man said softly. You've already been seen. We're not the only ones watching. Her throat tightened. Who are you? He slid a small card onto the table. Marshall Vane, Special Investigator, GAO Oversight. I'm not your enemy, he said. But you're walking into a 20-layer labyrinth. You think you found a loose thread, but the whole tapestry is rigged with explosives. Then help me untangle it. He looked at her for a long moment, then gave a nod. You need to go to New Orleans. That's where Praxis was born. That's where Monarch operated out of. And that's where Darnell was last seen publicly. By the weekend, Emily was on a plane with a backpack full of notes and a list of names Monroe had provided. The plane landed in the sticky dusk of Louis Armstrong Airport, and the city greeted her with jazz in the air and heat on her skin. New Orleans held secrets. She met her contact at a rundown bar on Chartres Street, René LeBlanc, a former journalist who'd specialized in parapolitical exposés until his career was derailed by lawsuits and anonymous threats. "You're braver than you look," he said as he lit a cigarette. "Or just naive. I just want the truth." He exhaled. "Then follow me." He took her down the riverfront, past warehouses and forgotten rail yards, until they reached a crumbling brick building with blacked-out windows. A plaque read, "Greater Gulf Imports, established 1961. This was Praxis headquarters," Renee said. "A shell company. From here, they moved men and material for CI-linked ops. But it was Monarch who gave orders. A man, a myth, maybe both. Rumor has it he had dossiers on everyone. Did Darnell work out of here? Occasionally. But Monarch was always the one who pulled strings." Emily stared up at the dark windows. "So who was Monarch?" Renee gave her a sideways look. "You really want to know?" "Yes." "Then you need to talk to the archivist." Back at her hotel, she searched old NOLA records and found him. Abram Kessler, former Praxis records manager, now living in semi-seclusion just outside Lafayette. If he was still lucid and still alive, he might be the last person with first-hand knowledge of the Monarch operation. She left the next morning, renting a car and driving west across the causeways and through bayou backroads, following the address Renee had scrawled for her on a napkin. Kessler's house was a weathered old plantation-style home, sunken slightly at the edges, surrounded by oak trees like sentinels. She knocked twice. No answer. She knocked again. Then the door creaked open. "You're here about Delta," the voice rasped. Emily froze. "How did you?" "You have the eyes. Same kind Monarch had. Hungry for the wrong kind of truth." Kessler stepped into the light. Thin, old, but sharp-eyed. "Come in, before they notice." Inside, shelves of old boxes and files lined every wall, stacked high and sealed with wax, twine, and rusted staples. It was like walking into a museum of forgotten ghosts. Delta was never supposed to be a person, Kessler said as he poured tea. Delta was a failsafe, an idea, one last stopgap if the rest failed. Assassinations were just the beginning. Monarch knew that controlling the narrative meant keeping Delta alive, just in case they needed to shift the story again. "Are you saying Delta wasn't a person?" "I'm saying Delta became a person. That's the problem." Emily leaned in. "Who?" Kessler opened a folder and handed her a yellowed photograph. It was of a younger Ellis Darnell, standing beside a man Emily didn't recognize. "That's Monarch," Kessler said. "And that was his apprentice." "His what?" Monarch wasn't one person. It was a role, a codename passed down, like a crown. Emily stared at the photo, realization dawning slowly. "So you're telling me Delta could still be out there? Not just alive, but active?" Kessler nodded. "And if someone started looking for him again?" He didn't finish the sentence. The window behind him shattered. A shot rang out. Kessler slumped forward, blood blooming through his shirt. Emily dove behind a bookshelf as a second shot punched through the wall. Someone was silencing the past. Emily didn't scream. Her breath caught in her throat as splinters rained down around her. Kessler lay motionless on the floor, one hand twitching slightly before going still. Blood pooled into the cracked wood beneath him, and the silence that followed the shot was almost worse than the sound itself. Her heart thundered as she crouched behind the bookcase. Another shot shattered a porcelain lamp beside her. Whoever was outside wasn't just warning her, they were hunting. She crawled low, eyes scanning the cluttered room for an exit. At the back of the house, she spotted a narrow door cracked open slightly, moonlight glinting through it. With a burst of adrenaline, she bolted, slipping on papers and ducking her head as glass exploded behind her. She didn't stop running until she'd cleared the tree line and stumbled down the slope toward the road. Her rental car sat half-hidden by Spanish moss. She threw herself into the driver's seat, blood pounding in her ears. Only once she was back on the highway did she realize she was shaking. Kessler was dead, and someone knew she was coming. She drove straight through the night, not stopping until she reached Baton Rouge. There, in a motel off I-10, she locked the door, pushed a chair under the handle, and collapsed into an uneasy sleep. Morning came too fast. She called Monroe from a burner phone. "Kessler's dead," she whispered. "He was shot." While I was there, Monroe didn't even sound surprised. You're getting too close. Whoever's behind Monarch, or what it became, they've been dormant for decades. But if they think you're going to wake up ghosts, they'll bury you first. They already tried. Then it's time you knew everything, he said. There's something I haven't told you. About me. About the last time Monarch was activated. Emily met Monroe at a private club in D.C., an old haunt for ex-spooks and diplomats whose power had faded but never really disappeared. He ushered her into a back room with soundproof walls and poured her a drink before speaking. In '78, he began, I was part of a congressional task force investigating covert operations during the Cold War. That's when I first heard the name Monarch. But even then, it was like chasing a ghost. Dozens of operations attributed to a Monarch asset, but no clear origin. Until we found a terminal at a disused NSA relay station. One document. One sentence. He handed her a photograph of an old green screen, its text pixelated. Monarch protocol status. Dormant. Standby for Delta signal. Monroe met her eyes. Delta wasn't a person. It was a switch. A contingency. Whoever Monarch was, he or she, designed the program to be reactivated if certain conditions were met. Political instability. Intelligence collapse. Mass disinformation. Emily leaned forward. You think that switch was flipped again? I think it never got turned off. And I think Kessler found out why. He slid a thin folder toward her. Recognize the name Elias Drexler? Emily shook her head. Didn't think so. Private intelligence consultant. Former diplomat. Deep ties to the early CIA. Changed his name in '65. Disappeared after JFK. Re-emerged in the late '90s as a national security advisor to various contractors. He's your Delta. The original one. But here's the twist. He isn't the one pulling strings now. Then who is? Monroe hesitated, then said softly, You are. Emily froze. What? Not you literally. But people like you. Researchers. Truth seekers. Monarch always feared one thing. Exposure. That enough breadcrumbs would bring someone to the doorstep of what they buried. The protocol was never about assassination. It was about control, of truth, of memory, of the narrative. But why JFK? Because Kennedy wanted to dismantle them. Break the back of the CIA after the Bay of Pigs. He knew something had taken root in the shadow government. And he wasn't wrong. Monarch's reach extended into corporate defense networks, foreign intelligence, even domestic surveillance. Emily stared at the folder. And Praxis still exists, Monroe said. Under a new name, Kendricks International. Defense analytics firm based out of Geneva. But their field offices operate across 5 continents. And their CEO? He opened a file on his laptop. A photo loaded slowly. It was the man from the photograph with Ellis Darnell. He goes by Seth Kendricks now, Monroe said. But he's Monarch, or the inheritor of the role. Emily's mind reeled. The man who designed the failsafe. The ghost who survived decades of political decay. And now he was running an international contractor group disguised as a think tank. What do we do? She asked. Monroe looked grim. You go public. That'll get me killed. Or it might finally collapse this thing. The next day, Emily met with Renee in a coffee shop near the Capitol. She gave him everything. Photos, files, the memo, Kessler's notes. Monroe had arranged a secure upload to international press outlets. But Renee didn't look relieved. They'll deny it, he said. They always do. And the public won't know what to believe. Truth is a malleable thing now. Then we give them something undeniable, Emily replied. We find Delta, the real Delta, Elias Drexler, and we put him on camera. Renee raised an eyebrow. He's in his 90s. He might be dead. He's not. Monroe tracked a recent biometric record tied to a secure medical facility in Iceland. Kendricks's private clinic. They're keeping Drexler alive. Probably drugged, maybe worse. But if we can extract him... Renee smiled grimly. Now you sound like them. They assembled a small team. Monroe, Renee, Emily, and a pilot named Walsh, a former Navy flyer with an axe to grind against government secrecy. They flew under the radar to Reykjavik, using backdoors and Praxis's own travel channels. Monroe's connections ran deep. They arrived under cover of darkness. The clinic was perched on a cliff above the sea, sterile and glass-faced, surrounded by security drones and guards in plain clothes. Emily and Renee went in disguised as foreign donors. Monroe stayed in the car, feeding them intel via an earpiece. Inside, the clinic was quiet. Too quiet. Emily followed the map Monroe had drawn until she reached a private wing. Room 407. 2 guards posted outside. She didn't hesitate. She pulled the fire alarm. As chaos unfolded, Renee created a distraction, and Emily slipped through a side door into the room. Inside, an old man sat in a wheelchair, staring blankly at a snowy television screen. She approached slowly. "Mr. Drexler?" He didn't react. She knelt beside him. "Do you know who you are?" Then, faintly, a whisper. "I kept the secret." Emily felt a lump in her throat. "I know, but it's time to let it out." She reached for the locket around his neck. Inside, not a photo, but a data chip. Backup of everything. They had it. Now they just had to get out alive. They didn't make it out the front door. As Emily pushed Drexler's wheelchair into the hallway, alarms blared and red emergency lights bathed the clinic in a hellish glow. The guards were regrouping fast, radios crackling with panic in Icelandic. "Back exit," Monroe said over comms. "North corridor, service tunnel." Renee's already heading that way. Emily's heart raced as she wheeled Drexler down the hall, praying the old man wouldn't pass out from the stress. He was mumbling now, broken fragments of memories and names, some in languages she didn't understand. Stanton, MK Dusk, Monarch Phase 2, Nightshade Prime. They burst through a heavy steel door into a cold utility hallway. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead. Behind them, boots pounded against tile. Renee appeared from a side door, slightly bloodied but grinning. "Took the scenic route," he said, lifting a pilfered security badge. "Come on." They made it through the tunnel just as a security team cut power to the main wing. Monroe was waiting with the car, engine already roaring. They piled in. The road twisted along the cliffside as spotlights swept the hills behind them. One spotlight locked on, then another. Gunfire cracked the silence. Emily ducked as bullets shattered the rear window. Renee returned fire through the broken glass with a pistol he'd stolen from a guard. "Remind me not to do this again," he shouted. "Only if we survive," Emily yelled back. The car fishtailed around a curve, sparks flying as Monroe clipped a guardrail. In the back seat, Drexler clutched Emily's hand with surprising strength. "You have to finish it," he whispered. "They'll come. Again and again." "I know," she said. And for the first time, she truly did. They flew out of Iceland under fake diplomatic credentials within hours. Monroe had called in every favor he was owed. Their next stop, Geneva. The data chip from Drexler's locket contained hundreds of files, encrypted, layered, and some decades old. Monroe decrypted the first layer aboard the plane. It was codenamed the Crownless Doctrine, and it was worse than anything Emily imagined. It detailed how Monarch had evolved since JFK, expanding through global defense contractors, embedding operatives in Western governments, controlling media narratives during the Cold War and into the Internet age. It listed code names, financial trails, front companies, black sites, and directives. Emily stared at the screen in horror. These were orders to neutralize world leaders. Not just Kennedy, but Lumumba, Mossadegh, even attempts on de Gaulle and Castro. And every time they failed, Monroe added, they just erased the records. Monarch wasn't just a contingency, it was a policy. Renee leaned over her shoulder. And now they know we have it. In Geneva, Kendrick's International's headquarters rose like a fortress of glass and steel. Monroe had already planned their entry. A sympathetic whistleblower inside, codenamed Minerva, would get them access to a secure terminal on the 42nd floor. From there, they could broadcast Drexler's testimony and the Monarch files directly to international watchdogs and media outlets. But it had to be fast. Once we hit upload, Monroe warned, we'll have 10 minutes before they shut down the building and seal the servers. After that, it's containment or elimination. Emily and Renee suited up as private security inspectors. Monroe, dressed as a diplomat, wheeled Drexler in behind them. The lobby was sleek and quiet, guards indifferent but watchful. It was a palace built by secrets. Minerva was waiting in the elevator, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a clipped accent. "They don't know I'm helping you," she said, "but they suspect someone. After today, I'll have to disappear." "Why help us?" Emily asked. Minerva smiled thinly. "My brother was in Dealey Plaza. He was just a bystander. Wrong place, wrong time. And then he was gone." The elevator dinged on 42. The server room was vast and cold, humming with unseen energy. Minerva typed in her credentials, overriding the firewall. Monroe slid the chip into the port. The files began uploading. A timer on the screen, 10:00, 9:59. Drexler sat upright in the chair, eyes clearer than they'd been since Iceland. He spoke into the microphone. "My name is Elias Drexler. I was known as Target Delta, but I was never a target. I was a tool, a weapon designed by Monarch. I helped build it, and I've lived in silence ever since. But no more." He told everything. The founding of Praxis, the evolution into Monarch, the operations in Laos, Chile, Iran, even domestic psyops. He named names. He didn't ask for forgiveness. And the whole world was listening. They didn't get the full 10 minutes. At 3:07 remaining, the fire suppression system kicked in, an unauthorized override. The room flooded with halon gas, killing the oxygen. Minerva slammed her hand against the emergency override. "Go," she yelled, coughing. "Get him out." Renee lifted Drexler, Emily grabbed the drive, and Monroe led the way through a maintenance stairwell as klaxons blared. They emerged onto a rooftop helipad, wind howling around them. A black helicopter was waiting. Not theirs. Kendrick stepped out of it. Tall, white-haired, calm. He held no weapon, but he didn't need one. "You could have left it buried," he told Emily. She stepped forward. "And you could have left the world alone." "You think the truth brings peace?" he said. "No, it brings chaos." Monarch was order. Quiet. Measured. You brought noise. And now everyone hears it. Sirens rose from below. Police. Media. Something irreversible had begun. Kendricks looked almost relieved. "Then I was the last," he said quietly. "The crown dies with me." He turned back toward the helicopter, and Monroe shot him in the leg. Kendricks crumpled to the pad, blood blooming beneath him. The pilot panicked and took off without him. Emily turned to Drexler. "It's done." But Drexler shook his head. "No, you just opened the next chapter." By dawn, Monarch was global news. The files were out. Names, dates, directives. The world reeled. Trials were called. Probes launched. Allies turned against each other. The myth had become truth, and no one knew what would rise from its ashes. Emily declined interviews. She gave one statement only. Truth doesn't belong to governments, or agencies, or shadows. It belongs to all of us. She returned to the National Archives 6 months later, walking through its quiet halls with a deeper reverence. She passed the JFK exhibit and paused. There, among the files, was a new placard. Target Delta, the lost file. Reclassified and released in full. Dedicated to whistleblowers, truth seekers, and the archivists who guard history. Monroe retired to a cabin in Maine. Renee wrote a book. Drexler passed quietly in Switzerland, buried under a false name. And Emily? She stayed where it all began. Because the next secret was always waiting. The fallout came in waves. In the days following Drexler's broadcast, global headlines erupted with accusations, counter-accusations, and frantic denials. Monarch was no longer a conspiracy theory whispered in dark corners. It was fact, exposed to a world unprepared for the weight of its truth. By week's end, the U.S. Senate convened an emergency session. Emily was subpoenaed to testify behind closed doors. She sat in a dim chamber, flanked by security, facing a semicircle of stone-faced senators. One leaned forward. "Do you believe there are still Monarch assets embedded in the government?" Emily looked him in the eye. "Not believe. No." There was a long silence. And then chaos. Outside the hearing room, protests surged. People held up signs with Drexler's face, with Emily's quote, with grainy stills of the JFK file and the line, "Target Delta, active." But the attention came with danger. Monroe sent her a text that night. "They'll pivot. From denial to discredit. Be ready." The next day, headlines appeared in fringe blogs. Archivist, a deep state plant. Emily Roth connected to foreign intelligence. A falsified photo of her at a Russian gala went viral before it was debunked. Renee sent her a voice message. They're playing the long game. Not assassination anymore, character assassination. Same goal, different tools. Emily, under heavy guard now, had little choice but to lay low, until the day she received a package. No return address. Inside, a single, yellowed manila folder labeled in red. Echo. Inside were 12 pages, stamped with a symbol she hadn't seen before. A chess piece, a pawn with a crown carved into its head. The content? A project analysis. A roadmap. Monarch, Phase 3. Codename, Echo Protocol. Emily's hands trembled as she read. Echo wasn't just a contingency, it was a reset mechanism. If Monarch was ever exposed, the Echo Protocol would launch disinformation campaigns so dense and contradictory that no single truth could be discerned. It weaponized ambiguity. Its goal wasn't to hide the truth. It was to bury it beneath 1,000 competing truths. A phrase on page 9 stood out in bold. In an age of infinite narratives, the truth is obsolete. She felt sick. Monarch was never a person, not even a program. It was a philosophy, a virus of uncertainty. And Echo was already live. That night, Monroe called from a burner phone. "We've confirmed Echo. Multiple data trails are flooding darknets. Conspiracy forums lighting up. Monarch wasn't real. Monarch was Mossad. Monarch was Vatican. Monarch was aliens. They're drowning the signal with noise," Emily said. Exactly. And Kendricks, his capture didn't matter. He was a failsafe, meant to fall, to give the illusion of resolution. Emily sat in the dark, the folder in her lap. "So what do we do now?" "We start again," Monroe said. "Expose Echo the way we exposed Monarch. But it'll be harder this time. They're attacking reality itself." Emily didn't sleep that night. The war wasn't over. It had just changed shape. She reached out to Minerva, who had gone underground in Eastern Europe. Through encrypted channels, they reconstructed parts of the Echo network, social media bots, shell news sites, fabricated whistleblowers. The project was massive, backed by unknowable money. Renee helped compile a new report, the Echo Matrix. Emily knew it wouldn't be enough to drop another document. This time, people needed to see the mechanics. So she made a film. Not flashy, not dramatized. Just truth. Step by step. How Monarch evolved. How Echo followed. Who benefited. How the weaponization of confusion had become the ultimate control. They called it the Shadow Crown. The film premiered quietly online, without trailers, press, or credits. It spread faster than anyone expected, shared by journalists, teachers, hackers, veterans. Within a week, it had 40 million views. Then it was taken down. By then, it had been copied 1,000 times. Emily's voice, calm and unwavering, echoed across the world. This isn't about conspiracy. It's about consent. To narratives. To systems. To silence. Ask yourself, when did you stop asking questions? She became a ghost in the machine. Unreachable, unseen, a specter of accountability. Monroe vanished not long after. Renee moved to a farm in Spain. And Elias Drexler's name became a historical fault line, pre-Delta and post-Delta. Before the reckoning. After the unraveling. A year later, Emily walked into a bookstore in Prague. No one recognized her. She wandered to the nonfiction section and smiled faintly when she saw a familiar title. Ghost State, The Monarch Doctrine and the Birth of the Echo War, by Renee Galvez. She turned to the back cover. A dedication. For ER, who remembered the truth when the world forgot. She left the store without buying it. Truth wasn't something to own. It was something to guard. And she wasn't done yet. 2 years passed since Emily Roth's name disappeared from the media spotlight. The world had begun to digest the revelation of Monarch and Echo, but for every truth seeker, there were dozens of disinformation agents working tirelessly to bury the last remnants of clarity. Monarch was a virus, a political pandemic, and Echo had mutated into something more dangerous, a weaponized web of stories, truths, half-truths, and deliberate lies. Emily's film, The Shadow Crown, had been mirrored, copied, and spread, but with each repost, new layers of noise were added. The truth had become impossible to distinguish from the fiction. But Emily had a plan. She sat in a small cafe in Berlin, sipping a lukewarm cappuccino as she scanned the encrypted message that had just popped up on her tablet. The subject line read, "The resistance is ready." It was from Minerva. The former intelligence analyst had resurfaced, pulling together a loose network of activists, researchers, hackers, and whistleblowers. Those who had also begun to realize that the fight against Echo was far from over. The message was simple. The time has come to target the operators of Echo directly. We have tracked one of their central nodes. It's time to cut the head off the snake. The node they had identified wasn't just a rogue server. It was the central command of Echo's amplification machine, a massive underground operation funneling misinformation to hundreds of millions of people every day. It was housed in a nondescript building in the Swiss Alps, heavily guarded by private mercenaries and cloaked behind a dozen layers of encrypted firewalls. Emily knew it wouldn't be easy, but the resistance had something Echo didn't: clarity. That night, she boarded a flight to Zurich alone. Monroe had retired from the game, his network shattered. Renee had vanished entirely, gone to ground somewhere in the Mediterranean. And Minerva's people were scattered across the globe, working from shadows. But Emily had learned something important in the past 2 years. When people are faced with the truth, no matter how obscured or fractured, they will fight for it. Not everyone, of course, but enough. And those people? They would be the ones to end Echo. Zurich was a city of contradictions. Charming, pristine, yet full of hidden pockets of power. Emily met with Minerva in a quiet, dimly lit cafe in the old town. Minerva was older now, her once black hair streaked with silver, but her eyes were as sharp as ever. "The Resistance has eyes everywhere," Minerva said, leaning in. "We've managed to infiltrate one of Echo's lesser nodes. We know where they are storing the most dangerous files. And we have the access codes." Emily raised an eyebrow. "And you're sure these codes work?" Minerva smiled grimly. "Not sure, but the people who gave them to me are people you can trust. Just like you." There was a moment of silence between them. "Then let's end this," Emily said quietly. They arrived in the Swiss Alps 3 days later, under cover of night. Minerva's contact, a former military strategist named Lucas, met them at the base of the mountain, his face obscured by a ski mask. He led them through a series of hidden passages until they reached an abandoned facility built into the side of the mountain. The building was cold, silent, but heavily fortified. Lucas passed Emily a small, discreet device, a hacker's tool capable of bypassing Echo's layers of encryption. "It's a one-way trip," he warned. "Once you access their server, they'll know you're in." Emily nodded. "Then we do it fast." They split into teams. Minerva, Lucas, and the rest of the group would create a distraction. Emily, with her hacking device and the information they'd gathered, would breach the server room. They slipped through darkened corridors, avoiding the mercenaries who patrolled the facility. Emily's heart pounded in her chest, the adrenaline rushing through her veins. This was it, the moment they could break Echo wide open. The server room was located deep underground. Once they reached the heavy steel door, Emily activated the device. The system fought back, forcing her to work quickly as alarms began to sound in the distance. Come on, Emily muttered to herself, her fingers flying over the keyboard. The screen in front of her flickered as she bypassed each layer of security, each more complicated than the last. She could hear the guards getting closer, their footsteps growing louder. Then, finally, the screen flashed green. The door opened. Inside the server room, rows upon rows of machines hummed quietly, their lights blinking in rhythm. Emily stepped inside, her breath shallow. She found the central server, Echo's heart, and plugged the device in. The data began to download. The moment she saw the files begin to pour in, she exhaled in relief. They had it. They had all of it. A voice crackled over her earpiece. "Emily, we've been compromised. Get out now." Emily froze. Behind her, the door slammed open, and a dozen heavily armed mercenaries flooded into the room. Lucas' voice was frantic. "Get out. Now." She grabbed the drive from the server and turned to run. Her heart slammed against her ribs as she sprinted down the corridor, the sound of boots echoing behind her. Minerva's voice came through the earpiece again, breathless. "We've got your back. Go." They ran for what felt like hours, the mountain seemingly shifting beneath their feet. Emily's lungs burned, but she pushed forward. She could feel the weight of the drive in her pocket. The truth was in her hands. Finally, they reached the exit. A helicopter waited in the distance, blades spinning. Minerva was the first to climb in, followed by Lucas. Emily took one last look at the facility before boarding. The helicopter took off, its engines roaring to life as they soared into the dark sky. Back in Zurich, they met with a handful of trusted journalists and activists, those who would help them spread the truth of Echo's origins and its insidious reach. But it wasn't enough to expose the files. No, they needed to take down Echo at its core. The world had to see it for what it truly was. Emily watched as the data began uploading to secure, decentralized servers, ensuring that no one group could silence it again. By the time dawn broke over the Alps, the world had already started to change. Minerva leaned back in her chair, glancing at the monitor. The world won't know what to do with this. Emily looked at the data, the file names, the encoded communications. The people behind Echo had grown too comfortable with their power, but now they were exposed. She nodded. They'll figure it out, just as we did. Minerva smiled. Do you think this is the end? She asked. Emily's eyes met hers. It's only the beginning. By the time the first leaks reached mainstream media, it was already too late. The documents, meticulously sourced, carefully encrypted, flooded newsrooms across the globe. But it wasn't just the documents that were crucial. It was the narrative that came with them. Emily sat in the dimly lit apartment in Zurich, staring at her laptop screen, watching the world react. Journalists, analysts, and whistleblowers had come together, piecing together the full scope of the Echo Protocol's reach. The truth was undeniable, and yet the world struggled to comprehend its magnitude. On one hand, governments scrambled to maintain control. They had too much to lose. Too many people would ask questions that no one could answer. On the other hand, grassroots movements exploded, demanding accountability from the powers that had orchestrated the global deception. Emily had watched it all unfold with a sense of grim satisfaction. This was the moment of reckoning, the day the world finally confronted its hidden rulers. But even as she breathed a sigh of relief, a gnawing feeling took root in her gut. There was more to be done. Minerva had become a central figure in the resistance, speaking out in interviews, coordinating with global activists, and leading the charge to expose the truth. Lucas, meanwhile, had become a figurehead for the new movement, gathering people from all walks of life who had once been complicit in or unaware of the shadowy machinations of Echo. But for Emily, this was never just about exposing the conspiracy. It was about exposing the system that allowed Echo to exist. Echo had been a symptom, a manifestation of a much older disease, a disease that transcended Monarch and its immediate aftermath. She met with Lucas in Zurich. He'd arranged a private meeting with a few key figures, activists, journalists, and researchers, who had access to the full data dump. They huddled in a secure room, the air thick with anticipation. The world's divided, Lucas said, pulling up a map on the wall. On one side, you've got those who still deny what's happened, who are trying to tear apart the narrative. They'll fight it to their last breath. But on the other side, we have millions of people demanding answers, demanding justice. Emily nodded. She'd seen the videos, the protests that erupted in major cities, the crowds chanting for truth, for transparency, for accountability. We've hit a tipping point, Lucas continued. But there's a bigger problem. Echo didn't die with Kendricks or with the server breach. We've only exposed one part of the operation. Echo's architects are still out there, hidden in plain sight. Emily leaned forward, the weight of their mission settling on her shoulders. Then we go after them. We need to expose their identities. No more shadows. No more layers of ambiguity. Minerva spoke up. They've already started fighting back. The disinformation campaigns are ramping up. False leaks, fake whistleblowers. The narrative is splintering. People are already starting to doubt what's real. Emily clenched her fists. We can't let that happen. The truth is a fragile thing. It needs to be protected. The resistance went on the offensive. The next phase was not just about exposing the files. It was about dismantling Echo from the inside out. Lucas, Minerva, and Emily began working with a small but powerful group of hackers, data scientists, and former intelligence officers to trace Echo's financial backers, its connections to global institutions, and its hidden operatives. But the deeper they dug, the darker it became. Echo wasn't just an independent operation. It was tied to the very infrastructure of global power. At the top of the pyramid were corporations, banks, and governments, together in an unholy alliance that spanned decades. Echo had been a tool of control, yes, but it had also been a means of preserving the status quo, a system that relied on manipulation and secrecy to maintain its grip on the world. Emily felt sick to her core as she read the files. It wasn't just about political assassinations or covert operations. It was about control of the global economy, about suppressing innovation, about manipulating entire populations to keep them in line. And at the very top of this chain, was a name that chilled her to the bone. Stanton Global Enterprises. The multinational conglomerate was listed in nearly every file, its fingerprints all over Echo's operations. It was one of the most powerful and secretive corporations in the world, a shadow government in its own right. Stanton had been the lifeblood of Echo, its primary funder and strategic partner. Emily's eyes narrowed as she studied the connections. If Stanton Global was involved in Echo, then the world was facing a threat far greater than they had imagined. The resistance worked in silence, their every move calculated. Minerva had become a key liaison between the group and independent journalists who were willing to risk everything to expose the truth. They were no longer operating on a small scale. This was a global operation, a battle for control over the future of humanity. Emily knew they needed to act quickly. They had the data, the proof, but they didn't have much time. As Echo's influence continued to grow, so did its ability to manipulate the truth. The longer they waited, the harder it would be to break the system. One evening, as Emily was reviewing files in her Zurich apartment, her phone rang. It was a secure line from Lucas. "Emily, we have a problem," Lucas said, his voice tight. "Stanton's pulling every string they can. We've been compromised." Her blood ran cold. "What do you mean compromised?" "They've infiltrated the resistance," Lucas said. "Someone within our circle has been leaking information to them. We're being watched." Emily's mind raced. This was exactly what they'd feared. If Stanton was involved, then they had resources, technology, and reach beyond anything they could handle. "Do you have a name?" Emily asked, her voice low. Lucas hesitated. "We don't know yet, but we have to go underground. If we stay in Zurich, we'll be caught." Emily looked at the files on her desk. The world was waking up, but they had to act fast. "I'll go underground. We'll continue this elsewhere. No matter what happens, the truth gets out." Within hours, Emily disappeared into the night, vanishing into the shadows of the resistance. The world was on the brink of transformation, but the fight was far from over. Echo's operators might have thought they could control the narrative, but Emily knew better. The truth was a force of its own, and it was only a matter of time before the world would rise against the darkness. The days that followed Emily's disappearance were filled with confusion and mounting fear. The resistance had scattered, its members going underground, trying to stay one step ahead of the ever-expanding network of Echo's operatives. Stanton Global, now fully aware of the threat the truth posed, unleashed its resources, private contractors, shadow media outlets, and deep cover agents, determined to stop them from exposing the final layer of the conspiracy. But Emily had anticipated this. The world, after all, had become accustomed to the myth of an omnipotent surveillance state. People thought they could hide their secrets in the shadows of the system, that they could control the truth. But Emily knew that the truth was more elusive than anyone realized. It couldn't be destroyed. It could only be hidden, temporarily. And when the time came, it would come for them. Months passed, and with each passing day, the stakes grew higher. The resistance regrouped, using encrypted channels and shadow networks to continue their fight. Lucas, Minerva, and a handful of trusted allies worked tirelessly, tracing the final pieces of the Echo network and digging into Stanton Global's operations. Emily had gone quiet. She was somewhere out of reach, operating from an undisclosed location. Her absence was felt, but her presence was everywhere in the actions of those who carried her message forward. The fight had become a movement built on the belief that truth could never truly be silenced. Then, on a cold winter night, the world shifted. A message appeared on encrypted forums, appearing like a ghost in the system, spreading like wildfire through global networks. It was simple. The architects of Echo are the architects of our world, but we are the architects of its future. It was signed Emily Roth. The message contained a link to a live-streamed broadcast. The countdown clock ticked down to 0, and then the screen flickered to life. Emily appeared, her face haggard but resolute. Her hair was shorter, her expression hard, but her eyes were the same, steadfast and unwavering. "Good evening, world," Emily said, her voice calm but firm. "For too long, we've allowed our lives to be dictated by the invisible hand of manipulation, by the ones who control what we see, hear, and believe. The people behind Echo were not just puppeteers, they were gods of deception, constructing a world built on lies." The broadcast continued, showing images of global power structures, corporations, governments, military-industrial complexes, all linked to Echo. The data had been decrypted, the final pieces exposed. It was all there for anyone willing to see. Emily's voice cut through the images, clear and resolute. They are the ones who control the stories we live by. They are the ones who decide who rises and who falls. But we have seen the truth. We have felt the weight of it. And now, we will rise to meet it. The feed cut, replaced by a massive data dump that began flooding the internet. Files, encrypted documents, surveillance logs, financial transactions, all connected to Echo and Stanton Global. The resistance had cracked the final wall, and it was more extensive than anyone had imagined. The documents revealed the true scale of Echo's control over the global economy, the manipulation of political elections, the suppression of social movements, and the orchestration of international conflicts, all designed to ensure the elite maintained their grip on power. But there was something more. Hidden within the metadata, encoded inside layers of false data, was a chilling revelation. Stanton Global, the very company at the center of Echo's creation, was not just a corporation. It was the corporation, the root of a centuries-old conspiracy that spanned governments, world religions, and secret societies. It was a web so intricate that even the most seasoned analysts could hardly comprehend its full scope. And now, the world had seen it. The response was immediate. Protests erupted in cities across the globe. People who had once dismissed the conspiracy theories as delusions of the fringe now saw the undeniable truth. Governments scrambled to contain the fallout, but the flood of information was relentless. Whistleblowers emerged from every corner of the world, corroborating the revelations. The media, now fully aware of the magnitude of the leak, began to pivot, with previously skeptical outlets picking up the story. And then, Stanton Global struck back. The corporation used its vast resources to discredit the evidence. They painted Emily as a rogue agent, a traitor who had manipulated the truth for personal gain. They accused the resistance of being terrorists, operating outside the law. But the tide had already turned. Minerva sat in the resistance's new headquarters, staring at the live feed as it continued to grow. The data dump was out there now. Unavoidable, unstoppable. Even Stanton's efforts to bury it could not stop the surge of people demanding answers. "We've done it," Lucas said, his voice heavy with emotion. Minerva didn't respond immediately. She was watching the news reports, the protests filling the streets, the media outlets working overtime to cover the unfolding chaos. "You think it's enough?" she asked, turning to Lucas. Lucas nodded. "It's a start. But this is just the beginning. The people are awake now. The question is, what do we do next?" Emily's message had reverberated across the world, but the war wasn't over. It had only just begun. Stanton Global tried to leverage its power to restore the old order, but now, they were no longer the untouchable giants they once were. The world had changed. People were demanding accountability, not just from their governments, but from the corporations and institutions that had held the reins for so long. And while Emily Roth remained out of sight, her influence was everywhere. The architects of Echo had underestimated one thing. They had thought that truth was something they could control, but Emily had proven them wrong. Truth, once awakened, could never be contained. It was like fire. Once it started, it could spread in ways no one could predict. In the weeks that followed, the resistance continued its work, not just exposing the truth, but rebuilding society's fractured understanding of it. The dismantling of Stanton Global had begun. Legal actions were taken. People were arrested. But the real shift was cultural. People started to see through the veil of manipulation that had been draped over their lives for so long. They began questioning their media, their governments, their financial systems. They started to demand transparency, accountability, and integrity from those in power. And as the world moved toward a new dawn, Emily Roth's name became a symbol of resistance, not just against one conspiracy, but against all systems of control. The fight for the truth had become a fight for freedom itself. Emily Roth's final message remained unchanged, her voice forever etched into the collective consciousness of humanity. The truth is not a weapon. It is a shield, and it is ours to wield.